Good morning, everyone. It is great to not see all of you. So we're a little over halfway through. Well, now you can't see me. Who's preaching? Are you or am I? We're a little halfway through our Letters to Leaders series. All right, good. We made it that far this time. And in the past month or so, we've learned some of the qualities a leader should have. What makes a leader? We have talked about servant leadership. We have talked about what to do as a strong leader. How to care for yourself, taking those moments to pause, to take a breath, so that you can be ready to go back and lead. This week, though, I want it to move us in a completely different direction. Kind of. We're still talking about leadership. But it's just kind of one of those moments in a movie where you hear a record scratch, and then everything pauses. We're going to kind of record scratch pause this sermon and throw you just for a little bit of a loop. So we've talked about vision, praying big prayers, staying humble, keeping your life centered, and all this assumes one big thing, that you're leading. So we've kind of talked about leadership as a position, and not all of us are in those positions right now. Now, this does not mean that you get to zone out. I want to make that very clear. You won't have an opportunity, because you may have an opportunity to be in one of those positions, an opportunity to lead sometime in the future. You may want to know the qualities of a good leader, because, now, I don't want to say this too loud, but you don't have to come to church here. You're here because you've chosen these leaders for yourself. And as a nation, we're about to go through a big, way too long, very annoying process where we pick our own leaders. And we're privileged to have that process. But if it was like 6 months shorter, I'd be okay with it. And even though you're not leading right now, the way that you eventually want to lead has already begun to take root. It has already begun to grow in you. And the way that you may eventually lead is not unlike the way you are now. So, as usual, this is best understood with a story, and as usual, that story is Captain America. Steve Rogers, where this clip picks up, Steve Rogers desperately wants to fight for his country in World War II. He believes that the Nazi regime is evil, and that evil needs to be met with decisive action by good men. And he wants to be a part of that. He has seen his friends go off to war, and here's what you need to know about Steve Rogers at this point. He is like 95 pounds soaking wet, and he's about 5 foot nothing. He was so out of shape and so not fit that the Army turned him down in 1941. Do you have any idea what it takes to have the Army turn you down in 1941? You practically have to be on your deathbed. Until Dr. Abraham Erskine sees something in Steve Rogers that no one else does. Something that makes him perfect for a secret project, creating a super soldier. It's not the super soldier serum, which was hard to say, but it makes Steve Rogers a hero. It's everything that happened in his life up until that point that made Steve Rogers a hero. Learning to think outside the box and not using his physicality to solve problems immediately. The courage to jump on the grenade when everyone else ran away. That is what makes Steve Rogers a hero. They can give him the power. They're going to fix that later. They don't need the big, strong guys. They need someone that's going to embody certain ideals. Someone that once they give him that power is going to use that power well. That is what Paul says in his letter to Titus. One of his friends and trainees, we're going to look at Titus 1, 5 through 9, and now Paul doesn't use Captain America here, but I'm sure he would have if he could. We pick up in verse 5. The reason I left you in Crete was that you might put in order what was left unfinished and appoint elders in every town. Now I want to take a pause here. Let's understand Titus's job. Paul has left Crete, he's done his missionary journey, and now he's telling someone that he was a missionary with, Titus, to say, I want you to stay here and set up a good system. I want you to stay here and appoint people that will continue the spiritual leadership for the people in Crete. So that is what we're looking for. We are looking for spiritual leaders. He is to appoint them in positions. Now, we are fairly fortunate because, as I said before, we have a lot of choice of churches. You are here because you've chosen the spiritual leadership here to lead you. We get to pick our leaders as a country, and that is an amazing and wonderful privilege. But this is what God is saying we should look for when we have the opportunity to pick a leader. And so we need to pay attention to this not just as potential leaders, but also as the people that get to choose their leaders. An elder must be blameless, faithful to his wife, a man whose children believe and are not open to the charge of being wild and disobedient. The next slide. Since an overseer manages God's household, he must be blameless, not overbearing, not quick-tempered, not given to drunkenness, not violent, not pursuing dishonest gain. Rather, he must be hospitable, one who loves what is good and who is self-controlled, upright, holy, and disciplined. He must hold firmly to the trustworthy message as it has been taught, so that he can encourage others by sound doctrine and refute those who oppose it. So what's amazing to me is what he doesn't tell Titus to do. He doesn't go and say, find the very best speakers. Find someone with such an organizational mind that they can put this together and form a system that picks its own new leaders and makes it work. Find someone who's great at coming up with dynamic programs and ministries that people love. Find someone who is whatever leadership buzzword you want to fill in there. Instead, he gives him a very clear set of qualities. See, God wants to make sure that the right person is given power and influence. The rest is secondary. But the following verses essentially tell Titus, look at two things. Look at how this person leads themselves. And look at how this person leads their family. I was curious about what we thought leadership failure looks like. So, I asked Google, because that's what you do. So these are some of the answers, and I thought they were very interesting because they were so different from what God says makes a leader not work. I saw leaders fail because they don't fit the culture that's there. There's just something about the way the office runs that doesn't mesh with their leadership style, and so it falls apart. They set the wrong goals. They have poor communication skills, or maybe just a myriad of things that falls under they don't manage people well. And then maybe there would be one. I looked at 4 or 5 sites, and maybe some of these sites had one that was like toxic personality traits. Or the personal failure of the leader. You see, we are not interested now in who is leading, but just so much that that position is filled. We don't look at the qualities of the person, but we say, what can they bring to us? We get enamored with past success, or with good speakers, or with leadership traits, or even with degrees and certifications. But God is more concerned with the character of a person. He begins with a list of negatives, which I think is interesting. Because these disqualify a person. They say, don't choose this person. These are red flag. This is a list of red flags. Traits that will actively harm what you're trying to lead. So for example, he says dishonest gain. When someone steals, this hurts the organization. They are not overbearing. They are not quick-tempered, not given to drunkenness, not violent. When someone is prone to anger and lashes out at the people they're leading, they become scared to try things, scared to learn things, and that's bad for the organization. When you can't depend on someone, that's bad for the organization. But just because you are not doing these things, which actively harm an organization, just because you're not actively harming, doesn't mean you're helping. So these are put up as red flags, but they aren't necessarily the quality of great leaders. If the best thing you can say about a leader is, well, they haven't really hurt us that bad, I would recommend that you find a new leader, because they aren't helping you either. Many people in that Captain America clip were not a bully, which was Dr. Erskine's complaint about the person Tommy Lee Jones' character wanted to pick. Many of them were not a bully. But only one jumped on the grenade. Only one had that positive trait that you wanted to see. You can avoid every negative trait we talked about and still not be a good leader because you do not embody these positive traits that we have. And just imagine these positive traits coming up in a meeting. You are part of the selection process. You are part of the hiring group, and you ask the question, well, let's see, is this candidate self-controlled? Is this candidate disciplined? These aren't normally the things that seem to come up in the meeting, in what we look for. But these are God's question. Can we move to the next slide? Is it stuck? Okay. Be hospitable. Love what is good. Be self-controlled, upright, holy, and disciplined. Know right teaching so that you can encourage and also defend what you hold to be true. Now what's interesting is you actually don't need a leadership position or a title in order to work on these things. These are things that we can work on and that we can use right now. And I've actually, this isn't actually where God starts. I've taken the second thing and I've put it first. But where God actually begins this list of traits is not with the qualities of a person, but he tells Titus, look at their family first. Look at their family first. He doesn't start with, are they humble? Are they a visionary? Are they a big thinker? Are they a bold prayer? He doesn't even start with this list of traits. He says, look at the person's family and how they're led. He says a person must be blameless. Now this should immediately disqualify most of us. So we need to take a closer look when it looks like blameless. Well, you can blame me for something. If you can find a blameless leader, pick them. He says, but the word here means there's nothing to take hold of. A leader that is not caught up in scandal. The husband of one wife. Now this has been taken to mean that this person cannot be divorced. This has been taken to mean that this person must be married. This has been taken to mean that this person has to be a man because it says husband of one wife and not wife of one husband. But here's what the actual Greek is. A one-woman man. Now that sounds like it should be in a funk song, not in the Bible, which might be why they changed it. But a one-woman man. So the idea is not that you don't have all sorts of wives. The idea is one of commitment. You do not need to be married to be committed. You do not need to be in a relationship to be committed, although you often see this become clear in a relationship, in a marriage relationship, or even just a dating relationship, or even just a relationship with friends. It is about faithfulness. The children must walk in truth and not be disobedient. And the word for not be disobedient is a very specific word. It's a callback, actually. The word is not in associa. And that word is the same word used to describe the prodigal son. Now, it's worth noting that I have a 3-year-old. And if you stay a little while after church, it may seem like she is in associa. But the word here, we need to remember, and Paul is urging them to remember this story that Jesus told. Because this story that Jesus told is about someone that left everything behind. Disrespected his father by telling him he didn't need him. Left the family, went to wild and riotous living in the next town over, and then, maybe the most important part, he came back eventually. So this is not write off these children, but there's already the opportunity for grace coming in. For God, the foundation of leadership starts in the home, not in the boardroom. And I was thinking of how to prepare this sermon, I thought of someone that I know that has experience both in the home and in the boardroom. His father was a key figure in the small town where he grew up. He brought in the radio station, cable TV, and even though people asked him to, he did not run for mayor because he was too smart for that. This person has been the executive director of the Indiana Dental Association, a statewide service organization, for 23 years, and he is also my dad. So, he's coming. I told him how I was going to introduce him, and I watched him sit there through the whole thing.
I was enjoying that part.
Oh. So we have a few questions, and we have talked this over some, but I'd like to start with a surprise. We're going to do this one newlywed game style. So I've written down my answer.
Okay.
All right. What is the biggest mistake you've made as a parent? I've got my answer. Let's see if they match. Are you feeling like it's this interview right now?
Biggest mistake that I've made as a parent.
That was a joke, but I'm interested.
You're choosing from the multiple mistakes. As you've already learned, parenting doesn't come with an instruction book. And it's always easy to look back on the things that, oh, I handled that so poorly, I wish I had the opportunity to do it again. And I could point to several, I won't go into the detail, but I think most of the parents in the room can relate to that.
Sure you don't want to go into the detail? We got time.
I don't think we've got time because there are a lot.
All right, so these verses in Titus suggest that good leadership starts at home. You've been the son of the leader. You have led yourself in and outside of the home. Why do you think that is where God chooses to begin, where leadership starts? Why does he tell Titus, first, look at the home, then look for these other qualities?
Well, you threw me a question that you didn't prompt me on in advance. The stuff that we talked about in advance, I've thought about and I've changed my answers, so you're in for a surprise too. Because as you were talking about the leadership and the ability to look into someone's heart, I was sitting out there thinking back to King David. Mm-hmm. And when Israel wanted a king. Have you guys talked about that in your series up until this point?
No.
I think it speaks to leadership because I think Samuel was the prophet. He was told to go anoint a king. He gets to Jesse's house and says, hey, I've been told the new king is coming from your family. I need to meet your sons. And so one at a time, the sons come out there, and Samuel gets the message, no, it's not him. It's not him. Go through all of the sons, and Samuel is perplexed because he said it's going to come from this family. And it winds up being the little shepherd boy out in the field who Jesse didn't even think to bring into the conversation because not this guy. He didn't have the potential for being a leader. And the prophet's response back is God doesn't look at the outside. He looks at the heart. And it was the heart of David that he was looking for, and David ultimately became the king. So why is Titus told, and Timothy as well, look at the family. What kind of family background? What does that look like? We don't have the ability to look into the heart like God does. We don't have that window. So what's the next best alternative? Perhaps it's look at the family environment that they grew up in, or the family environment that they're in now. How do they interact with their family? And if you do that, then maybe you're actually getting a glimpse into their heart. And that's where the true leadership qualities are going to come from. So that's my new theory that I didn't think about until about 10 minutes ago.
Yeah, it's that story, that verse ended up on the cutting room floor for this sermon because Dr. Erskine in the movie clip actually recalls it. Dr. Erskine in the comic lore is Jewish, which makes sense, which has a lot of significance. But I love that they gave him the line, I am looking for qualities that go beyond the physical, because it recalls the story of Samuel choosing David. And I don't know if the writers had that in mind when they gave him that line, but it certainly is a lesson that's steeped in Jewish tradition, a line that's steeped in Jewish tradition. So, what are some leadership lessons in the home that you have learned, or that you have as a son or as a father, that you think you can only learn there, where you, once you're in the boardroom, the business environment, you're saying, well, it's a good thing I know this from home, because I'm not sure I would have picked it up.
Yeah, I don't know that there are things that you can only learn in the home. I think there are a number of things that you're most likely to learn at home. And we're learning whether we realize it or not, or whether we want to or not. And so right now, Cora is watching everything that you and Kelly do. And you don't think about the way you're raising Cora as I'm training this young lady to someday be a leader. But she's, number one, watching how the two of you interact with each other. That's a lesson that someday she's likely to take into a marriage. She's learning temperament. She's learning how a husband responds to a wife and how a wife responds back to a husband. She's learning discipline. Slow lesson for her. I've kind of watched, the rough spots there when we come to visit. We've all got our own minds. We've all kind of, want to focus on that. But in the family is where you learn where the boundaries are and what's allowed and what's not allowed. I'm a product of that. How it translates kind of from the family to the board meeting, which I think was your original question. My dad was a product of the Great Depression. Grew up with very limited means, and so I'm growing up in a family that's very careful with spending money, tight with money, more focused on if we can put this money away and save it as opposed to spending it. That's kind of the environment that I grew up in. So this last week, I've got a business trip where two of my staff members are going with me, and I told one of them to look up and find out what arrangements they could find and come back, and we're flying in the day before for a meeting that starts at 1 o'clock in the afternoon the following day. The hotel room rate, it's about $300 a night times 3. You're looking at almost $1,000 that it's going to cost us if we arrive the night before as opposed to the day of. The problem with arriving the day of, the only flight that would get us there in time leaves Indianapolis at 5:45 in the morning, which means we're up at 3 o'clock to get packed to get to the airport in time to make the flight. They were opting toward going in the night before. As a result, I think directly of my upbringing, thinking, you guys one night, you can imagine, you can manage to find a way to get up early, and we'll take that 5:45 flight, and we'll be there well in advance of the 1 o'clock start for the convention.
There are actually two lessons there.
Okay.
One is just saving money, that thriftiness that you picked up, but also I want to do what's good for the organization, and I will put that ahead of maybe what's good for me.
Yeah, it's a good point. I mean, if I was the business owner and it was my money on the line, then maybe I would splurge and say, sure, let's go in the night before. It's a not-for-profit organization. It's not my money that I'm spending. It's the organization's money. And I've always approached that as if, how would I handle this situation if I was having to write the check or if it was coming out of my billfold. And there's no doubt in my mind, if this was a Bush family vacation, you guys would be getting up at 3 o'clock in the morning with me to catch that flight. As a matter of fact, you did a time or two.
I've done that. For those same meetings, we would often take meetings as an opportunity to go on vacation, because sometimes your meetings took you to interesting places.
Right.
And so I remember getting up to go to one meeting that was actually in Hawaii. That was a cool trip, and Hawaii 5-0 was playing because it was so early.
Yeah.
They didn't want to bother real time, but at 5 in the morning they'll play it.
But the point is, I think the emphasis that Paul was making on family, not that it's a perfect gauge, because there are a lot of good ministers and church leaders that have come out of horrific family environments. They've had to overcome it. They've had to get, and that's why I say, what are things that you can only learn in the family? No, there are other places that you can go to pick up on those traits. Maybe your parents aren't the best role models for you, but there are other places that you can learn those leadership traits. But Paul, talking to Timothy and Titus, saying, okay, I'm charging you with the responsibility of recruiting leaders, and these leaders, and the language is actually used, these leaders are being entrusted with God's family. You know, it's a terrific responsibility that they're being given. Okay, Titus and Timothy are saying, how do I know I'm picking the right person? And he says, well, start by looking at their family. Are they managing their own family well? It's not tried and true, guaranteed, but it's going to give you a glimpse into the heart since you don't have that divine ability, that divine window into the heart. And then he starts looking at these other outside characteristics as well, but the family is one of them.
I love the line that is in there. It says, if his own home is in disorder, why do you think this person can come in and lead God's home?
You know, and a word of caution there, because in our car ride to the church building today, we were talking about a young minister that we're both acquainted with, who right now, his family is in disarray, in disorder. I think we got to be careful that we don't put more pressure on church leaders, that we kind of assume the role of the Job friends, where your family's in trouble. What do? You know, what have you done wrong? Confess your sin. Ministers, elders, church leaders, ministry leaders, Bible school teachers, they're not immune to trouble in their own home. You know, as long as there's free will, then you can have the kid that goes bad, or you can have the spouse that goes astray. Lots of bad things can happen in a family environment. But again, Paul's talking about generalities. And if given the choice between this family that's in chaos and this family where you see it's in order, then you need to be looking over here.
You carefully pointed to where no one was sitting.
Okay, good move on my. Okay, those chairs are empty. That was a safe gesture.
And you've touched on this a little bit, but Paul says go to the family. Well, there are some people that may come from a negative family background that are saying, I kind of don't want you to look there. Yep. That's not who I am. I've moved on from that. I am healed from that. And then there are other people that may be saying, my family has passed on and my kids don't live here. Mm-hmm. Or, you know, I have chosen to emphasize other things over family. Paul also says singleness is a gift. Then look to your family. Well, pick one, Paul. But for those not in family situations, where can their leadership journey begin? Where would you look as someone, because you aren't allowed to ask about the family
not when you interview
when you're
people.
selecting people. Where are the other qualities? Where else can you look to see where their leadership journey begins or the roots of it?
Well, there's two circumstances there that I think you touched on. You can be in an environment where you're looking back at your family and you do not see role models. You do not see characteristics that you want to emulate. You want to run the other direction because that's not what I want to happen in my family. That's not what I want to be as a leader. There are others, where the single person who looks around, they don't really have a family to draw upon. I think that you look to other people that you see the characteristics, some of the characteristics that you had up there on the screen that Paul is describing is traits of a good leader. And you look at those and say, who do I see that in? What other mentors do I have? Could be a school teacher, could be a minister. Could be a coach, could just be a friend. I know your mom, and she's told this story, so it's safe, I think, to repeat, but she didn't grow up in the ideal family situation. She was a single mom. Father deserted the family when she was a toddler, about Cora's age. But she can name the people that she looked to fill the role of mentor, that fatherly figure. Daddy Britt and Dr. Hamilton, that she looked at and said, I don't have a dad to look to, but I'll find somebody else. And I think that there's wisdom in that. Even as a young girl, she picked up on that. But there's wisdom, even as an adult, to say, I don't want to look back at my family for my role models, but where else can I see that? What other people have a life that I think are going to be an example? And it's easy to say, well, Jesus is my example, which he is and should be. But sometimes, I heard a kid put it this way one time, I need somebody with skin on. I need somebody that I can actually hold hands with and sit down and cry with and say, help me, and how should I handle this situation? For those, I think that we're dependent on other people and picking that right person. If it's not the family member, I think that's the next step.
Yeah, we can look to Jesus, but when we decide we're going to look only to Jesus, we actually miss out on the gift of community that he's given us.
Yep.
And so that should be the ultimate goal, but we need to see the gifts that we have all around us as well. Thanks for coming up.
Yep, glad to do it.
All right, you want to stay up here, or you want to
Nope,
head
I'll go back to my seat.
All right.
All right, thank you.
You seem to like it there. So what Paul doesn't mention, and what I'd like to conclude with, is that sometimes God picks his own leaders. You see this throughout the Old Testament. And there's a lesson that we can learn from this. One last lesson. God chose Abraham, who lived in conflict with his family, who lied about his relationship with his wife and said that she was his sister, who was not even faithful to her and had a son out of wedlock. God chose Moses, who was so proud that he took credit for the work of God and ran away scared when God told him the plans that he had for Moses. God chose Paul, the author of Titus, when he was still going out and persecuting Christians. And as someone that loved God and was so devoted to God that he wanted to stamp out this heresy that we now call Christianity, what do you think it was like going back to his family and saying, I'm a Christian now? Awkward. There is no perfect leader on this earth. We are all flawed people doing our best, and we should take this as good news. Because while what is put forth in Timothy looks like a set of hard and fast, unbreakable rules, I feel confident saying that Titus didn't find anyone that measured up to all of these. But he used these as guidelines, that he had to bend them just a little bit. Maybe someone had great self-discipline, except they got angry a little bit at the time. Maybe someone had to leave their family behind in order to join the way, in order to become a Christian. And so that relationship is not great, but they have so many other qualities that it outweighs it. What he found is what we find when we look for leaders today. He found people. People that have messed up, that have come from broken families, that has a history of lying or stealing or wild living. And he found the very things that we find in people today. We shouldn't take these criteria and think that God is incapable of using us or that we'll never be able to lead well. Instead, I want us to think of this, and especially the leaders, to think of this as a path that we're all on. The very things that Paul tells Titus to look for are quite similar to the fruit of the Spirit. They're qualities that as Christians we revere and that we want for ourselves. And we're on a path to being good exemplars of that, to this Christ-like mentality that we expect of our leaders. By the grace of God, we can leave behind the toxic traits and habits and walk down this path moving closer to a godly life. The further that we go along that path, the more we'll find other people on that same path that maybe for whatever reason are a little behind it, may find it useful to follow us for a little while. And that's what I think this view of leadership is. You don't have to have a position to exemplify what God says is a good leader. You just need to be walking along the path that leads you closer to Jesus. And some people will find, you know what? That's someone I want to follow for a while we walk the same path. Will you pray with me? Father, we aren't perfect. And you know that better than any of us. And yet you've still chosen us to help you lead, to further your mission on this earth, whether that is through an official title or whether that is just as a parent or a friend. Father, help us to move along this path, acknowledging that you walk with us and beside us, helping us. Help us to move closer to you. And Lord, help us to responsibly help those that are following us. In your name we pray. Amen. Father God, I pray that you give us the opportunity to lead more than we are able. Help us to see us as you see us. To see these qualities so that we don't finally meet you saying we've left opportunities, we've left relationships on the table. And now we can't lead the way we meant to. Heal us, so that we're ready for those opportunities when they come. In your name, amen.